And if it's not, then it's out of balance and it's going to get dinged for points. And even if you never compete, your goal should be to create a balanced mead that presents well. I've had lots of meads that I would never let anybody else have, but I like them,
No.
They're okay for me, but I won't submit them for judging because I know what's going to happen. I've done it. I judge my own meads. I handed one out Friday. I had a friend who is from Maryland, and he always stops here on his way to the Carolina Renaissance Festival. And I usually send him off with a bottle of mead, and I sent him off with a bottle of some stuff that I've had stored for years and years and years that I neglected to label, so I have no idea what it is. And I tasted it before I let him take it. And I was like, well, normally I wouldn't even let anybody touch this, but if you like it, you can have it. And he says, I love it. And I'm like, great, here you go. Enjoy. And he did, and he liked it. And all weekend I'm thinking, oh, my God, if I was judging that, it would have been like a 25. And, thinking that it's not good enough. I'm my own worst critic.
We all have our dirty pleasures, though. There are things we all like that, would not win medals. And we like them anyway. So,
yeah.
Don't be ashamed of your meads.
What does well in judging from a professional standpoint, what does well in judging is not what necessarily does well in sales. It's relative. It's a good touch point to say, is my mead balanced? Is my mead, does my mead have weird faults that I did not detect? But beyond that, it comes down to, do you like it? If you and your friends like it, then that's all that really matters in the end.
That's true, but if you make a good balanced mead, even with the same ingredients, or maybe you have to buy a little of this or that to make some adjustments, but that same mead really balanced well, you're going to like it a lot better than if it's made out of balance.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
and
so
that's...
You guys, balance doesn't mean equal. That's a math equation piece. That's not a mead maker piece, right? So here's an example. I like making some tart cherry meads with Montmorency cherries.
I love Montmorency cherries. They're great.
Would you expect that to have a strong tart piece to it? Absolutely,
probably.
Right?
Yeah.
If I turned into a competition, this is a tart Montmorency mead, and there's no tart cherries in there, is that in balance?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. Right. I'd make a cranberry mead. You think that has some tart to it?
Oh, yeah.
You better bet it.
Yeah.
And so it's also a very sweet mead, right? By nature, it has to be, pretty much.
To get it to balance out, you have to do that. I'm making I've got some muscadine juice that I bought when I was at a muscadine winery. It's a big thing here in North Carolina, and I was down at a muscadine winery, and I picked up some cider, and so I posted on the Got Mead Facebook group. I want to do something. This is too sweet by itself, and I don't want to ferment it out dry or semi-sweet because I feel like it would take away from that muscadine note. So I want something to balance that sweetness that the muscadine has. And what we came back with, a whole lot of people suggested, it was cranberries, and I think that would be great because cranberries are super tart.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the two of them together would actually be really interesting. I wouldn't necessarily have picked that, but hey, what the heck?
Right.
Okay, we do have another question from Gandalf, and Gandalf is a new-ish mead maker. I've talked to him several times on Twitter, and he's really doing a lot of interesting stuff. So he's learning fast. And
Hi, Gandalf.
Yeah, hi, Gandalf. He says, how high should the acid level be at the start, and should acid be added, and if so, what kind?
Perfect question.
Mm-hmm.
The first part, how high should it be? That depends on the honey that you put in there. And it depends on, are you putting pears in there or are you putting cranberries in there? I don't. Now, you'll find if you read, there's people that have the mentality that you need to adjust some of these things prior to fermentation. I'm not going to say they're wrong, but I'm going to say they're wrong for me. And I don't adjust prior to fermentation. And I think oftentimes when we taste flabby meads in a competition, I wonder if they made acid adjustments or buffering adjustments prior to fermentation.
Ryan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you define for the folks who maybe are not familiar, what is a flabby mead?
A flabby mead is, so the other term we use is it's fat, it's kind of boring, it's uninspired.
Insipid.
It's lazy. It just doesn't have any snap to it. It doesn't have any character. It doesn't have any structure. It's just help me, you guys, because you know as much as.
Picture drinking something that's as sweet as a soft drink, but without all the acidity to balance it out.
Oh yeah, think about drinking
like a flat Pepsi.
Yeah, like a flat, exactly, like a flat Pepsi or a flat
exactly,
Coke.
Because then you don't have the carbonic acid to offset it.
To give you that acidic note, yeah. And so it's nothing but sweet, and it's basically one-dimensional. You want, balance. You want sweet and acid. If you've got sweet, you need acid to balance it. If you don't have that, it's flabby.
Well, so that's true, but let's talk about, here's one thing. There was a thread in Facebook just last week about acid additions. Well, when I first started making mead and tried some acid additions, I didn't like what they ended up with. And at this point, I can't remember. I don't know if I was using the acid wrong or I don't know, but I very early on in my career moved away from acids. But here's what I did instead. Because if you want to add an acid, that means that you want to either dry it, you want to make it's overly sweet. So that's one thing about flabby. It's too sweet. It's like drinking maple syrup.
No, it's worse than drinking maple syrup. But drinking maple syrup is good.
So anyway, flabby means it's way too sweet, and it's out of balance because there's nothing to. You need to bring the flabby back over to the other side of the spectrum by drying it out. So I learned very early on how to use oak because of the astringency, and so I could dry flabby meads out with oak, or instead of using acid additions, meaning bags of powder that you can buy at your homebrew store, I started using zest, and I've used a whole bunch of zest, including grapefruits, lemons, limes, oranges, mandarin.
Citrus in general.
Yeah, and I started using zest to brighten up my meads if they were, on that flabby side, or they were uninspired, they were boring. Instead of using acids, I started using zest. And so my answer was always, we need to dry this guy out, or we need to add some acid. We need to add some zest to him. And then just recently, 2 weekends ago, there was a competition in there was a competition in New York, and some of the guys took some of the winning meads after the competition was over and did an acid test with them, and they said that, and this was Eric Lowe, he was on our podcast 3 or 4 weeks ago. They did some acid additions to all of the winners and made them even better by adding some acids.
I'm actually working on trying to get him to do a presentation at the AMMA conference about that. So, yeah, and that was Gandalf says he bought tartaric acid.
So Gandalf, you're going to want to use that primarily. Well, for sure, you want to use that in stone fruits and piments. But that's actually probably the only acid that's a well-rounded acid that works for an awful lot of different things. But acids are very strong, so you need to go slow.
Well, taste it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Go slow and sneak up on your final results after several days of trying. What I mean by that is our palates change from day to day, and sometimes even from morning to night.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Gandalf asked for grapes. I think he's making a pie mint. He had tweeted.
Yes,
he
absolutely.
tweeted me about that a few days ago.
Yeah, right. So going back to now, kind of what we've learned in full, hopefully tonight, your tartaric acid would be the acid that you want to add if you need to brighten it up. But if it's too sweet, you could also use oak to dry it out, and oak will also give it some character, so that'll help the blob stand up straight. And you could also add zest if you wanted to as well. And so those are the three different options that you have, or carbonation. But generally, I don't think too many people carbonate pie mints. That'd be kind of fun to play with.
It would be fun to try. If you're kegging, you can do that, yeah, but I don't know that I want to try that in a bottle. I think that would be...
I don't think anybody should be trying to make a carbonated mead naturally, period, end of story. You just need to force carb it in a keg. So yes, tartaric is your acid. Go very slow, and before you get there, just actually stop and test it for 2 or 3 days before you make a decision, do I need to add more or not? The thing with any of these adjuncts that we can add, you can always add more later, but you can never, ever, ever take them back out. Almost. I mean, there's some fining agents that will, on occasion, take out a little bit of, too much tannins, for instance, or something, but very rarely can you go backwards in this thing. And very rarely will our palates experience everything the same from day to day. And so I would creep up on it very slowly, and when you think you're getting close, I would then take the general consensus of a 3 or a 4 day test before I wanted to move on forward, just so that you don't overdo it, because balancing these flaws are just as hard going in one direction as they are in the other. Or actually, they're harder to dumb them down instead of bring them up to speed, if that makes any sense, hopefully.
Okay, we are at 2 hours and 15 minutes, so...
Yeah, so the point here is, guys, that this is not something that you're going to learn right away, although hopefully if you took some notes and then go back and listen to the podcast again, and once you understand this stuff, you might not have the experiential experience. How's that? You might not have the confidence or understanding that comes from it, the hands-on experience, but at least it's going to point you to the right tools so that you can start learning in a more educated and thoughtful way than just, winging it with a prayer and hoping that you can throw enough darts into the sky that it lands on something that counts. It's not that hard, and it's fun. And so this goes back again to making mead. I think too many times we're in a hurry because we just want to make another batch. I don't like to give people recipes, number one, because I would much rather teach you how, with the whys, to make a mead than to give you a recipe, because I could take a 7-year-old kid and he could follow a recipe and make a mead and not have the first frickin' clue in his life of what any of that means. And so I'm really very short on ever giving people recipes until they've gotten to a place where if they say, well, what about this? I don't have to go through everything except, the yeast selection of some of the adjuncts, and then I don't even have to tell them how much. So in other words, if you learn how to make a mead, you won't ask, what should I use? I have not asked for a recipe in a very, very long time, and I'm not patting myself on the back, but I'm just saying, please, please, please try very quickly to move beyond just wanting a recipe, because if you learn the hows and the whys, then you'll know what you want to add to your stuff. And then if you understand these 5 or 6 different